All right, so let's jump into it. Today, we're doing a deep dive into Apple
Yeah.
using their 2024 Form 10K and that
Yes.
Q1 2025 10Q they just filed as our guide here to kind of give you a solid understanding of just how Apple is doing, the challenges they face, and where they might be headed.
Yeah, it's like we're getting a sneak peek behind the curtain of like how their current strategy is going using these financial filings.
Exactly.
But
So
yeah.
first things first, what's Apple actually selling these days?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the iPhone is huge,
Yeah.
but like there's a lot more to their business, right?
Absolutely. They've got a pretty diverse product lineup. They've got the iPhones, the Macs, the iPads, and then they have this category they call wearables, home, and accessories, which is everything from Apple Watches and AirPods to that brand new Apple Vision Pro.
Right.
Remember, that's their spatial computer that's been generating so much buzz.
Right. And we can't forget about their services.
Right.
Apple Care, Apple Pay, and of course the App Store.
Of course.
It seems like services are becoming a bigger and bigger piece of the pie for them.
Your spot-on services brought in a massive $96.1 billion in 2024, which was a 13% jump from the year before.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge.
And that growth was mainly fueled by advertising the App Store and cloud services. So it really shows how Apple is evolving beyond just hardware.
So overall, looking at their financials, their net sales for 2024 were $391 billion. That's slightly lower than 2022, but we're still talking massive numbers here.
Yes.
What really stood out to me was how well Macs and services did. Both saw big increases in net sales.
Yes, and I think that contrast is really interesting. While iPhone sales stayed pretty flat, Mac sales actually went up by 2%, so that could be a sign that maybe they're shifting their focus, or maybe it just reflects the success of new products like the Mac Studio.
Yeah, it does make you wonder if they're intentionally pushing other product lines.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole gross margin thing. Apple reported a gross margin of 46.2% for 2024, up from 44.1% in 2023. They say cost savings were a big factor in that improvement. But to be honest, I'm not always sure what gross margin really tells us.
Good point. Gross margin basically shows how much profit Apple makes from each dollar of sales after subtracting the cost of making those products.
Oh, okay.
So a higher gross margin means they have more money left over to invest in things like research and development, which is crucial in such a fast-paced industry.
Got it.
In fact, their 10K specifically talks about how important it is that they consistently come out with new and innovative products and services.
Okay, so a healthy gross margin is good news for keeping Apple at the forefront of technology.
Yeah.
And they definitely seem to have the resources for it. We're talking about a company with $140.8 billion in cash equivalents and marketable securities.
Wow.
Plus, they spent a whopping $95 billion buying back almost 500 million shares last year.
Yeah.
What's the deal with these buybacks?
Right.
Are they always a good thing?
Well, stock buybacks can be a bit complex, but essentially they reduce the number of outstanding shares, which can potentially increase the value of each remaining share.
Right.
Think of it like slicing a pie into fewer pieces. Each slice becomes bigger.
I like pie.
It's a way for companies to return value to their shareholders.
Interesting. So it's not necessarily about needing less stock, but more about influencing the value of each share.
Exactly.
But let's be real. No company is without its challenges, right?
Sure.
And Apple actually specifically mentions several risks in their 10K filing.
Right.
I mean, they basically spelled out a whole list of things that could go wrong.
Yeah, that's true. And one of the first things they highlight is the impact of global and regional economic conditions.
Right.
So a recession or high inflation could seriously affect consumer spending, which would directly impact Apple's bottom line.
And what about their reliance on that massive global supply chain?
Right.
It seems like most of it is located outside the U.S., which feels a bit risky.
Definitely, they actually single out international trade restrictions, especially those concerning China, as potential disruptions. Think about it. Tariffs or export controls could suddenly appear, impacting the flow of parts they need.
Oh, yeah.
That would be a huge headache for them.
And we've seen firsthand how things like natural disasters or, a global pandemic can throw everything off. Those kinds of things can hit both production and demand.
Exactly. It creates this double whammy effect that can be hard to predict and manage.
Yeah.
And on top of that, Apple relies heavily on custom components from single sources.
Okay.
So if one of those suppliers has a problem, Apple could be scrambling for alternatives. Imagine if they suddenly couldn't get enough iPhone screens.
Oh, wow.
That would be a disaster.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure on a single supplier.
For sure.
Speaking of risks, what about intellectual property?
Yeah.
Apple relies on licenses for a lot of technology, right?
Okay.
What if those suddenly become more expensive or disappear entirely?
Yeah, that's a major concern for them. Their 10K actually emphasizes how important it is for them to secure those licenses on commercially reasonable terms.
Okay.
If they can't, they might have to change certain products or even stop selling them altogether. It's a huge potential vulnerability.
It really makes you realize how fragile even a giant company like Apple can be.
Yeah.
Plus, there's this whole regulatory and legal landscape they're dealing with, which seems to be getting more and more complicated.
Right. The European Union's Digital Markets Act is a perfect example.
Yeah.
They're all about ensuring fair competition, and Apple is already facing investigations related to App Store rules and default settings on their devices.
And what are the potential consequences if they're found to be violating this act?
The fines are pretty hefty, up to 10% of their annual global net sales.
Right.
We're not talking small change here, even for Apple.
Wow.
And it's not just the EU. They've got that antitrust lawsuit from the Department of Justice and the ongoing battle with Epic Games, the creators of Fortnite.
Right. It's starting to feel like they're fighting battles on multiple fronts.
It is.
So with all this regulatory scrutiny and these high-stakes legal battles,
Right.
what does it all mean for Apple's future?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's not just external pressures. They're dealing with their internal focus on things like attracting and keeping talent and maintaining good corporate governance will also play a huge role in their future.
Yeah, their 10K actually dedicates a lot of space to those topics.
Yeah.
They emphasize creating a positive work environment, offering great compensation and benefits, and promoting inclusion and diversity. It sounds like they're really trying to position themselves as more than just a place to work.
It's an interesting strategy, especially in today's world where competition for top talent is fierce.
Yeah.
They're basically saying, come work for Apple and you'll not only have a great job, but also be part of something meaningful.
And they're definitely walking the walk when it comes to diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
Their 10K mentions ongoing efforts to increase representation at all levels of the company. That's not just good ethics. It's good business. Diverse teams often lead to more innovative solutions.
I agree. It's also tied to their focus on things like employee engagement and health and safety. It feels like they're trying to build a workplace culture that people want to be a part of.
They even mention having a strict insider trading policy and processes for pre-clearing transactions in Apple securities.
Right.
It's like they're going above and beyond to be seen as a responsible and ethical company.
It makes sense with their size and influence. Any misstep could have massive repercussions. It seems like they're very aware of the need to maintain a strong reputation, both ethically and in terms of corporate governance.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've looked at Apple's products and services, how they're performing financially, the risks they face, the legal and regulatory pressures they're dealing with, and even their internal focus on their employees and corporate governance. Where do we go from here? What's next on our deep dive?
Well, we've talked a lot about the present, but now it's time to look ahead. We've got all this information now. Let's use it to consider how Apple might navigate the ever-changing technological and business landscape.
I like it. Let's shift gears and explore what the future might hold for Apple.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so we've established that Apple is this, giant in the tech world,
Yeah,
but they're not immune to challenges.
right.
Looking ahead, what are some of the things that they specifically call out as potential bumps in the road?
Well, one thing that jumps out from both their 10K and their recent Q1 2025 filing is this word fluctuate.
Yeah.
When they're talking about their expectations for sales and their overall financial results.
Yeah, it seems like they're trying to prepare everyone for the possibility of some ups and downs.
Right.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess even a company like Apple can't predict the future perfectly.
Right. They're basically acknowledging that the market can be unpredictable.
Right.
And they point to several specific factors that could lead to this volatility,
Yeah.
particularly when it comes to their gross margins.
We talked earlier about how important gross margins are for a company like Apple.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that they're worried about that could affect that?
They mention things like pricing pressures and increased competition,
Right.
which is understandable in such a dynamic industry. I mean, staying ahead of the curve takes a lot of investment, and there's always someone trying to undercut you or offer a similar product for less.
And what about their product mix?
Yeah.
Does that come into play?
Yes, absolutely. They actually mention the potential impact of shifts in their product mix. So, for example, if they sell more products with lower profit margins,
Right.
it could affect their overall profitability. It's a balancing act, really.
Then there's the whole issue of foreign exchange rates, which
Yeah.
always seems to be a hot topic in their earnings calls. The strong U.S. dollar has been a bit of a headache for them, hasn't it?
Definitely, with such a large portion of their sales coming from outside the US, a strong dollar can really eat into their profits.
Right.
Because it means those international sales translate into fewer US dollars when they report their earnings.
Right.
And they specifically mention this as a risk factor.
So they're dealing with currency fluctuations, pricing pressures from competitors, and the potential for their product mix to shift.
Yeah.
What else are they keeping an eye on?
Well, they also mention credit risk exposure and the possibility of their investments losing value.
Right.
It's a reminder that even a company with as much cash on hand as Apple is not immune to market volatility.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is.
It is.
Speaking of interconnectedness, I have to admit, I got a bit lost when they started talking about this upcoming change in accounting standards.
Okay.
Something about segment reporting and FASB, ASU, no, 2023-07.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for me?
It sounds complicated, but it's actually all about transparency.
Okay.
This new standard will basically require Apple to provide investors with more detailed information about how different parts of their business are performing,
Okay.
including their expenses.
Okay, so more transparency is generally a good thing for investors, right?
Yeah.
But I'm curious, why are they waiting until the fourth quarter of 2025 to adopt this new standard?
Yeah.
Why not do it sooner?
It likely comes down to the logistics of implementing such a big change.
Right.
Think about it. They probably need to update their systems, their data collection processes,
Oh, yeah.
their reporting procedures. It's not something you can just do overnight.
Yeah.
They need time to make sure everything is accurate and running smoothly.
That makes sense. It's easy to forget that even something like changing an accounting standard can be a huge undertaking for a company as big as Apple.
Absolutely.
So, taking a step back, we've covered their current financials, the challenges they're facing, and even a peek into the future with this accounting change.
Right.
What's the big takeaway from all of this?
I think it reinforces the fact that Apple is a true powerhouse in the tech industry.
Yeah.
They've got a wide range of products and services, strong financial performance, and a real commitment to innovation, but they're not invincible. They're facing some real headwinds, like with the global economic climate vulnerabilities in their supply chain and this increasingly complex regulatory environment.
Yeah, it really highlights how they're constantly walking this tightrope.
It is.
Trying to balance the needs of their investors, their customers, and all these regulatory bodies.
Right.
And they need to do all of that while still staying ahead of the curve in terms of technology and innovation.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. They need to keep regulators happy, fight off legal challenges, keep their employees motivated and productive, and somehow still manage to create products and services that people love.
Right.
And of course, there's pressure from investors who always want to see growth and a return on their investment.
Right. So as we start to wrap up our deep dive into Apple's world,
Yeah.
what's the one thing you think our listeners should keep in mind?
I think the key takeaway is the speed at which everything is changing. Technology is evolving faster than ever. Consumer preferences are constantly shifting, and the rules of the game are being rewritten all the time, especially in the regulatory landscape.
Right.
The Apple we see today will almost certainly look very different from the Apple of tomorrow.
It's a fascinating story that's still unfolding, but before we completely sign off, I want to leave our listener with one final thought. So we've talked about all these challenges Apple is up against, but how might they adapt their business model to stay ahead of the game?
That's where you come in, dear listener.
Oh.
Think about it. How can Apple maintain its competitive edge, while navigating this world of tightening regulations and evolving customer needs?
It's a tough question.
It is.
Maybe they'll focus even more on their services.
Yeah.
Creating even more enticing subscriptions and ecosystems that keep users hooked.
Right.
Or maybe they'll venture into completely new markets, pushing further into augmented reality or healthcare or even financial services.
We're already seeing glimpses of this, actually. I mean, the Apple Vision Pro is a bold move into spatial computing.
Yeah.
And their ongoing legal battles, especially those related to the App Store, suggest they're not afraid to challenge the status quo.
They definitely seem willing to shake things up.
For sure.
But no matter what path they choose, one thing is crystal clear. Apple's story is far from over. This is a company that consistently pushes boundaries.
Yeah.
Both in terms of technology and strategy.
Absolutely. And as their story unfolds, we'll be here deep diving into the filings, dissecting the data, and uncovering the insights that help you stay ahead of the curve.
So if you're as intrigued by Apple as we are,
Yeah,
we encourage you to explore their filings for yourself.
for sure.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
You never know. You might even uncover like a clue that helps us all understand what the future holds for Apple.
That's it for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.
And remember, the most valuable insights are often the ones you have to dig for.